Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to talk about times and dates in English. If you're like most people in business, every day is scheduled down to the minute. We've all got meetings, timelines, tasks, and deadlines to worry about. And it seems like our phones are constantly buzzing with calendar notifications. To keep these complex schedules up to date, we often have to ask people when something is going to happen. An easy way to do that is with the word when, like when is the meeting? That could mean either the date or calendar day or the time. So, if you need to be more specific, you might ask, at what time is the meeting? Or, what's the date for the meeting? Let's try these ways of asking about when something will happen. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Could you tell me when the meeting is scheduled?
What's the date for the product launch?
At what time is the delivery supposed to arrive?
When do you need this report by?
That first example is about when a meeting is scheduled. That's a common way of asking when something is arranged to take place. You can also ask when something is supposed to happen. Now, if you know that someone is asking about a date or the day when something is scheduled, what can you say? Well, it depends. If it's one specific day, then you say it will happen on that date. If you're not sure of the exact date, you can say it will happen around that date. And if it's something that has to happen sometime before a certain day, you can say it must happen by that date. Does that make sense? Why don't we try some examples to make sure this is clear? Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
The conference will begin on July 14th.
Our staff retreat will run from September 3rd to the 5th.
We'll need to finish the new website by the 12th.
We should get together sometime around January the 4th.
Of course, you probably noticed that not everything happens on or before one single day. Some events, like a company retreat, happen over several days. In that case, as you heard, you can say something runs from one date to another date. And when you say those dates, remember the special form of the number. We don't say January 1, 2, or 9. We say January 1st, 2nd, or 9th. So we've talked about dates, but how do we talk about the time of day? Well, there are several important expressions you need to know. Firstly, we don't say on a time, but rather at a time. Like, the office opens at 9 a.m. But just like dates, if you're not sure exactly when something happens, you can use around. So you might say something like, the delivery should be here around 3 p.m. And notice that we use a.m. to indicate the morning hours and p.m. for the afternoon. Talking about time also means talking about duration or how long something happens. A useful word in this case is last. For example, we can say a meeting lasts 1 hour. Let's try some practice with these time expressions. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
The webinar starts at 10 a.m. sharp and lasts about an hour.
We should be able to finish up around 4:30.
It's 3:30 now, so we've got a couple hours to go.
I'm hoping we can get there sometime between 9 and 10.
So what does it mean if you have a couple of hours to go? Saying you have a certain amount of time to go means you have that amount of time remaining. So if it's 9:30 and the meeting is supposed to finish at 10, then you have 30 minutes to go. Okay, so we've practiced some examples on their own. But how do these expressions sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Bill and Laura. They're talking about when a factory tour is going to happen. Let's listen.
Were you able to schedule the factory tour?
Yes, the tour will take place on August the 4th.
Great. And did you set a time on that day?
We'll start at 1 p.m. and finish up around 2:30.
That seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? When Bill asks about the scheduled factory tour, Laura tells him it will take place on a certain date. And when he asks about the time of day, she tells him when it will start and around when it will finish. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember that the tour will happen on August 4th, begin at 1 p.m. and finish around 2:30.
Were you able to schedule the factory tour? Great. And did you set a time on that day?
All right, that about does it for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to ask about when things will happen and talk about dates and times. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to describe people and their characteristics in English. Listen in on any office conversation or meeting, and you'll hear a lot of talk about people. Who we like, who we don't like, who's right for a team, who should get a promotion, who is going on vacation. The list of topics goes on and on. And one aspect of people we often discuss is their appearance or how they look. To do that, we use adjectives like tall or short or well-dressed or heavy or thin. When we describe people, we also talk about the color of their hair. And here's a couple of special hair words for you. Brunette means someone with brown hair, and blonde refers to someone with light or yellow hair. Let's try describing people's appearance using some of this language. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Gary is a tall, red-haired guy who usually wears glasses.
Bob looks a little bit like Dave, our former manager.
Jordan is really well dressed and always smiling.
Tina has long brown hair and green eyes.
Now, did you notice that expression, looks a little bit like? The basic expression there is looks like, as in Nancy looks like Tina. In other words, they appear similar. A couple more similar expressions for comparing people are sounds like and acts like. When we say someone acts like another person, we're talking about their behavior or what they do. Just like appearance, we often describe behavior with adjectives. For example, we might say someone is eager or enthusiastic. We might also talk about how they do things, like works hard or treats people with respect. Let's try some examples of describing people's behavior. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Charlie is always eager and ready to help.
I tend to work harder when I'm under pressure.
Kendra is the most enthusiastic person in the office.
Joe treats everyone with a lot of respect.
As you heard, it's not only other people that we describe. Sometimes we describe ourselves, especially in situations like job interviews. And not only do we describe behavior, we also describe character. Character is about what type of person someone is. It might include behavior, but it also includes someone's overall personality. To talk about character, we rely once again on adjectives. And the more adjectives you know, the better you can describe people's character. Some people are serious, while others are fun-loving. Some people are hard-working, while others are lazy. Some people are shy, while others are outgoing. Let's practice some of these adjectives for describing character. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Nancy seems pretty serious, but she's always fair.
The right candidate should be hardworking and flexible.
I would describe myself as a good learner and resourceful.
Daisy can be quite shy, but she's very smart.
You probably know most of those adjectives, but resourceful might be a new word. If someone is resourceful, it means they are good at finding ways to solve problems. That's a great way to describe yourself in a job interview. Okay, so we've practiced describing people with some examples, but how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Kent and Paula. They're talking about a person who has applied for a job at their company. Let's listen.
Remind me again, which candidate was Jason?
Jason was the tall guy with blonde hair.
Oh, right. And how was his interview?
Well, he seems smart, but I wonder how flexible he is.
That's not too difficult, right? When Kent asks Paula to describe Jason, she says that he's tall and has blonde hair. And when Kent asks how Jason's interview went, she says he seems smart, but she wonders if he's flexible. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to describe Jason as tall with blonde hair and say he's smart, but you wonder if he's flexible.
Remind me again, which candidate was Jason? Oh, right. And how was his interview?
All right. That's it for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to describe people's appearance, behavior, and character. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to make generalizations in English. Don't you hate it when people say things like, Americans are rude? I mean, not all Americans are rude, and people in other countries are rude too. It's simply not helpful to say something is true of a whole group of people. When it's negative like that, it feels wrong. But it can be helpful to describe a group of people as long as we're clear that it's not everyone we're talking about. We call this a generalization. For example, many of my friends work in finance. I'm making a generalization about my friends, and it doesn't have to be people. If I say most of our online sales come from Europe, I'm generalizing about sales. Let's try making a few generalizations like this. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Very little of our business comes through online sales, actually.
Many of the customer concerns are about delivery times.
Most of the people I've talked to like the new website.
On the whole, our employees are pretty happy with their jobs.
Did you hear that expression, on the whole? That's a useful phrase that means in general. You're not talking about everything or everyone, just overall or mainly. Besides phrases like on the whole, you can make this type of generalization with words like most and little. Now, we don't only generalize about how much or how many. We also generalize about what happens. For example, you might say something like, the department budget is normally reviewed by our manager. That word normally tells us that it doesn't always happen, but it usually does. Let's practice some examples of generalizing about things that happen. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Generally speaking, we see higher sales in the summer months.
Nine times out of 10, customers give us great feedback.
Normally, our new employees go through a training program.
In most cases, we finish our projects ahead of schedule.
So, besides normally, you can use expressions like in most cases and generally speaking, and the other expression we heard is 9 times out of 10. That sounds pretty exact, doesn't it? But it really just means in most cases. We don't really mean exactly 90% of the time. This leads me to talk about how often something happens. That's something we can generalize about as well. And it's very important which words you use. You want to be somewhat accurate. For example, are you late for work usually, sometimes, or rarely? These are frequency words. If you don't use a frequency word, then you are suggesting that something always or never happens. And that might not be true. Let's try some of these expressions for generalizing about how often something happens. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
People don't usually buy something on their first visit.
More often than not, we run out of paper before the end of the month.
It's pretty rare that people complain about our service.
Our staff meetings often last more than 90 minutes.
You probably already know the word often, but what do you think more often than not means? It actually just means more than 50% of the time. We also heard the adjective rare. That's made from the word rarely, meaning not often. Some other frequency words have adjective forms, such as usually, which becomes usual, but others, such as often, don't. Okay, so we've practiced some expressions for generalizing about how many, about how things happen, and how often. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Justine and Andy. They're talking about Andy's customers and products. Let's listen.
So, where are your customers located?
Most of them are in Canada and the US.
And are they happy with your products?
Well, it's pretty rare that we get any complaints.
That's pretty simple, right? When Justine asks about the location of Andy's customers, he says that most of them are in Canada and the US. He's generalizing about how many. Then he says that it's rare that they get complaints about their products. That's generalizing about how often something happens. Makes sense, right? Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say that most of the customers are in Canada and the US. Then say it's pretty rare to get complaints.
So, where are your customers located? And are they happy with your products?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to generalize about how many, about what happens, and about how often things happen. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to explain a problem in English. Much of your work probably involves solving problems, and sometimes we can't do it alone. But cooperating with someone to solve a problem means explaining it clearly. Before you explain the problem, however, you'll need to ask for help. Two really useful words in this situation are would and could. These words help you make polite requests. For example, you might say, "Could you help me?" or "Would you help me with this?" And we can add to these expressions to get longer, even more polite expressions. Let's practice some ways of asking for help using would and could. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Do you think you could give us a hand with this?
Would you mind showing me how to do this?
Could you help me with this?
I would appreciate a bit of help.
As you heard, we can build a polite sentence around would and could using questions like, "Do you think you could?" and "Would you mind?" This is much more polite than giving people direct orders, like, "Help me, please." Now, if someone agrees to help you, what do you say next? Do you start describing the problem in great detail? Or do you think it would be better to say generally what the problem is? Well, at the start, it's good to be more general. You can give a short overview of the problem to give the person a general idea of what it's about. Let's try some examples of giving a general statement about a problem. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
It looks like there's a safety issue at the factory.
We've got some problems with the website.
I can't seem to get the copier to work.
The security system isn't working properly.
Did you hear another word that has the same meaning as problem? The word is issue, as in there's a safety issue. Or you could have a technical issue, or a security issue, or a staffing issue. Also notice that a lot of problems are about whether something works. That just means whether it functions properly. Now, it's not usually enough just to know that there's a problem. If we hope to solve it, we usually need to know what happened to cause the problem or make you think there was a problem. In this case, you need to tell a little story, and you should use the past tense to describe what happened. For example, you might say, "I turned the computer on, but the screen was blank." Or you might say, "X happened when I did Y." And at this point, you should be specific and detailed about what happened. Let's try some practice with describing what happened using this approach. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
The problem started when we made changes to the home page.
So I tried to save the document to the shared folder.
The machine made a strange noise when I turned it on.
I opened the program, but I couldn't log in.
Of course, explaining a problem clearly might mean making several sentences like this to describe the situation. And with a clear understanding of the situation, hopefully the other person will be able to help you solve it. Okay, so we've practiced lots of useful examples for talking about problems. But how do these expressions sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Christy and John. John is trying to describe a problem with his website to Christy. Let's listen.
So, what seems to be the problem?
It looks like there's an issue with the website.
Oh no, what's going on?
Well, it started when I updated the home page.
Simple enough, right? When Christy asks about the problem, John says there's an issue with the website. And when Christy asks for more detail, he explains that it started when he updated the home page. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time, we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say, it looks like there's an issue with the website. Then say it started when you updated the home page.
So, what seems to be the problem? Oh no, what's going on?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to ask for help, make general statements about a problem, and describe what happened. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to give instructions in English. Telling people what to do isn't just something the boss does. Anytime you're helping someone with a problem, training someone, giving technical advice, or telling a colleague how to do something, you're giving instructions. Of course, it's very important to be clear when you're giving instructions. And for that reason, we sometimes explain things step by step in a sequence of instructions. This means using words like first, secondly, and thirdly. Or you might use other words like next, and at the end of your sequence, finally, or lastly. Let's practice some ways of using these words to give a sequence of instructions. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
First, try closing the program and opening it again.
Secondly, I'd like you to complete the rest of the form.
Next, you'll have to choose a password.
Finally, don't forget to log out at the end of the session.
So, did those instructions sound like orders? I mean, do you think giving instructions means saying, do this and do that? Well, not exactly. In fact, in English, we don't like to be too direct in most situations. That's why we say, can you try closing the program, instead of close the program? Or, you'll have to choose a password, instead of just choose a password. One way to avoid being too direct in English is to use special words called modals. Modals are words such as can and need to, and could and should. Using modals is easy. You just put the modal between you and the main verb. For example, you might say, first, you need to open an account. Let's try some examples of giving instructions using modals. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
You'll need to enter your username and password to begin.
Okay, you can now open the app and create an account.
Could you try restarting your device?
You need to start by launching the program from the main menu.
Did you notice that one example came in the form of a question? That's an extra polite way of telling someone to do something. Not every modal can be used that way, however. Only can and could will work. For example, could you check if your password is correct? Is just a nice way of saying, check your password is correct. You can also combine sequences and modals to find the right balance between being clear and polite. But what if you're not sure whether you've been clear enough? What if you don't really know whether the other person has understood? Fortunately, we have lots of different ways of checking understanding. And the best way is just to ask directly, like, do you understand? You might also ask if people are clear or whether everything makes sense. These are just different ways of asking if something has been understood. Let's try some practice with checking understanding using these expressions. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
So is everyone clear on what they have to do?
Okay, do you understand how this works now?
Does that make sense to you?
Any questions about what you need to do?
As you heard, one other way to check understanding is to ask if there are any questions. That way, you can find out exactly what people don't understand. Okay, so we've practiced some useful ways of giving instructions and checking understanding. But what do these expressions sound like in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Sean and Kim. Sean has asked for help using a machine, and Kim is giving him instructions on how to use it. Let's listen.
Could you help me with this?
Sure. First, try turning the machine on.
Okay, I did that. What's next?
Next, you can turn the dial on the front to 50.
Does that make sense? Kim begins by instructing him to turn the machine on, then to turn the dial to 50. She uses the sequence word next and the modal can. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say that first, Sean should turn the machine on. Then, say next and instruct him to turn the dial on the front to 50.
Could you help me with this? Okay, I did that. What's next?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to give instructions and to check understanding. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn some expressions for answering the phone in English. Using the telephone is an important part of business. But the way we communicate is a little different from in-person conversations. We have some special expressions we use to answer the phone, ask for clarification, and get a call back. At the start of a phone call, it's a good idea to make sure the other person knows who you are. You can identify yourself in a few different ways. Besides saying, "My name is," we often use the expression, "This is," before our name. But don't try to use this expression in person. I only say, "This is Tim," when I'm talking on the phone. Let's practice identifying ourselves at the start of a phone call. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Hi there, this is Jason Locke calling from Milton Enterprises.
Oh, hello. My name's Wendy Chambers with BMA Bank.
Good morning, Dirk here. How can I help?
Hello, Francine speaking.
As you can hear, we identify ourselves not only when we call someone else, but also when we answer the phone. To do that, we just say something simple, like, "Tim here," or "Tim speaking." Now, because we only have a person's voice on the phone, there's a higher chance we don't understand something. It might be a single word or a whole sentence that isn't clear. In this situation, you need to ask for clarification. You might ask, "Could you repeat that?" Or, "What was that?" Or you might simply say that you didn't catch something, which means you didn't hear correctly. Let's try some examples of asking for clarification. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Sorry, what was that?
Could you repeat that last part again?
Sorry, did you say 14 or 40?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
One very important word you heard several times in those examples is sorry. That word helps make our requests more polite. You also heard an example of asking for clarification between two similar words. In this case, you just ask, did you say X or Y? Another common situation is when you need to talk about calling someone back. Maybe you called a business to talk to someone who's not there. Or maybe someone called your business to talk to someone who's not in. In any case, we need to arrange a callback. Polite ways to arrange a callback often use the expressions could you or would you. For example, you might say, could you ask John to call me back? Or, would you like Tom to call you back later? And sometimes it's you who has to call someone back because you're busy or have a poor signal. In that case, you might ask, would you mind if I called you back? Let's try some practice with asking for a callback using these expressions. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Could you have Dave call me back at this number?
Would you like me to ask Mary to return your call?
Please have Charlie call me when he's available.
Would you mind if I called you back in 15 minutes?
One useful expression that we just heard is to have someone do something. That is, you can say, I will have Greg call you back tomorrow. That just means you are asking Greg to call the person back. Okay, so we've practiced some useful expressions, but how do these sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Carly and Bob. Bob is calling Carly's office to talk with Jenny Schwartz, but Jenny isn't there. Let's listen.
Hello, Ace Business Machines.
Hi, this is Bob Turner. May I speak with Jenny Schwartz?
Sorry, but Jenny's not in the office right now.
Okay, could you have her call me back, please?
Does that make sense? Bob identifies himself and asks to speak with Jenny Schwartz. When Carly tells him Jenny's out of the office, Bob asks her to have Jenny call him back. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to identify yourself as Bob Turner and ask to speak with Jenny Schwartz. Then you'll politely ask Carly to have Jenny call you back. Ready? Here we go.
Hello, Ace Business Machines. Sorry, but Jenny's not in the office right now.
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to identify yourself on the phone, ask for clarification, and talk about calling someone back. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to end a phone call in English. Last time, we looked at lots of useful expressions for answering the phone and starting a call. But what about ending a call? If you've finished your conversation, what can you say to end the call politely? Well, for starters, one thing you want to avoid is just suddenly saying goodbye. To end a business call professionally, there are 3 simple steps to follow. First, you signal that you want to end. Secondly, you review your action points. And finally, you say goodbye. Now, signaling that you want to end a call often starts with a word like, well, so, or okay. These words show that you want to change the subject. Then you can thank the person and say you need to go, or make a general comment. Let's practice some of these ways of showing that you want to end a call. Listen to each example. Then, repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Well, I should probably get going.
It's been great to chat.
So, thanks for all the information.
Okay, I've got to run here.
As you can hear, these types of comments signal an end to the conversation. You might have noticed 2 different expressions that mean you have to leave a situation. First was, I should probably get going. And the second was, I've got to run. These are just friendly ways of saying, I need to leave. Now, a business call is like a little meeting. So, the second step in ending a call is reviewing the actions you've discussed. Often, this means stating what you will do next, like, I'll send you the file tomorrow. And if you want to confirm what the other person will do, or what you'll both do, you can turn your statement into a question using a tag. That might sound like, so you'll review the proposal next week, right? Let's try some other examples of reviewing next steps. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
So I'll send you that file tomorrow, and you can let me know what you think.
All right, so we'll be chatting again next week, right?
I'll have that package sent off right away.
I'll look out for your email later today.
One expression you might have noticed there is I'll or I will have that package sent off. For example, what does it mean to have something done? It means you make sure the thing is done. It might be you, it might be someone else, but you will make sure it's done. All right, so you've signaled that you want to end the call, and you've reviewed next steps. Now you're ready to sign off or say goodbye. There are many ways to say goodbye in English. You can wish someone a great day or a good weekend or good luck with something. And we often say, take care, or mention when we'll talk again. Let's practice some more ways to sign off at the end of a call. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Have a great day. Bye now.
Take care, Amy. We'll talk again soon.
All right then. Have a good weekend.
Good luck with your presentation.
Did you hear that expression, bye now? You might also hear people say, bye for now, or maybe, bye then. These are just common and friendly ways of saying goodbye. So, we've practiced some useful expressions, but how do these sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Mark and Leslie. Both people are signaling they want to end the conversation and using expressions to sign off. Let's listen.
Well, I hope your interview goes well.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been great to chat.
For sure. Glad we could catch up.
All right then. Have a good weekend.
How did that sound? Leslie thanks Kevin for saying he hopes her interview goes well. Then she makes a comment about their conversation. Mark responds with his own comment, and Leslie signs off by wishing him a good weekend. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to thank Kevin and say, "It's been great to chat." Then you'll wish him a good weekend after using the expression, "All right then."
Well, I hope your interview goes well. For sure. Glad we could catch up.
Well, that's all for this lesson. We've learned a 3-step process to ending a business call. This includes signaling you want to end the call, reviewing the steps, and saying goodbye. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to talk about prices in English. Business is all about money. The whole purpose of a company is to earn more money than it spends, so that it can produce a profit. So it's not surprising that we spend a lot of time talking about how much things cost. Whether you're buying materials or reviewing a budget, you may find yourself frequently asking about prices or costs. The most common way to do this is with the expression, how much. So you might say, how much does it cost? Or, how much are you asking? In this case, the asking price is the seller's starting price. Of course, you might ask very directly about price with a question like, could you tell me the price? Or, what will it cost for something? Let's practice some of these expressions for asking about price and cost. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
How much are you asking for these printers?
Could you tell me the price on this machine?
What will it cost for 3 additional phone lines?
So, how much does it cost us to make each unit?
One interesting thing about the word cost, we can say the machine costs $5,000, and we can say it cost us $500 to fix the machine. So, a thing can cost money, and it can also cost you money. Now, if we can reduce costs, we can usually increase profit. So it's very common to state that something costs too much. You might say that something is too expensive, or that the price is high. But you might also say you can't afford something. Afford means to have enough money to buy something. Let's try some examples of saying something costs too much. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
I'm sorry, but that's too expensive.
That seems really high compared to other companies.
I don't think we can afford that.
I'm afraid that's out of our price range.
Did you hear that last example about price range? Your price range is the amount you have to spend on something, like $200 to $250. An item can be in your price range, meaning you can afford it, or it can be out of your price range, meaning it's too expensive. If something is too expensive, naturally, you would suggest lowering the price. To do this, we normally use polite and indirect language. We don't just say, lower the price. Instead, you might say, would you take a lower price? Or, is there any way we could bring the price down? Or, if you're talking about your company's costs, you could say, let's see if we can reduce costs. How about some practice with suggesting lower prices and costs? Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Let's see if we can reduce these costs by 20%.
Would you take $500 per unit instead?
Is there any way we could bring down the price?
How about knocking $40 off that price?
One informal expression you heard was to knock money off a price. For example, if someone asks for $100 and you want to pay $80, you can say, "Could you knock $20 off?" All right, we've practiced different ways of talking about costs. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Matt and Liz. Matt is trying to buy a machine from Liz.
How much are you asking for this unit?
That one is going for $3,500.
That's out of our price range. Would you take $3,000?
I'll have to talk to my manager about that.
Pretty simple, right? Matt starts with the question, "How much are you asking?" Then, when he hears the asking price of $3,500, he tells Liz it's out of his price range and suggests a different price. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by asking about the price. Then you'll say it's out of your price range and ask if Liz would take $3,000. Ready? Here we go.
That one is going for $3,500. I'll have to talk to my manager about that.
Okay, that's all for this lesson. We've learned how to ask about price, say something is too expensive, and suggest a lower cost. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to make arrangements in English. Think of all the things that flow in and out of your company. It could be anything from office supplies to raw materials. How do these things get to where they need to be? Someone is making arrangements. And although lots of things are ordered online, there are still lots of arrangements made over the phone. So how do we make arrangements? Well, it starts with a polite suggestion or request. In polite requests, we often use the words would and could. For example, you might say, "I would like to arrange a delivery," or "We would like something shipped." Of course, I would can be shortened to I'd, and we would to we'd. To use could, you might say, could we schedule a delivery? Let's practice some of these expressions for suggesting an arrangement. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
I'd like to arrange for a delivery of office supplies.
Could we schedule a shipment for next week?
Any chance we could have some paper sent to our Walkerton branch?
We'd like some units shipped as soon as possible.
Notice the different verbs we use to make arrangements. We can say arrange, or schedule, or have something sent or delivered. When we have something done, we are making arrangements for someone else to do it. Now, one important part of making arrangements is talking about when something will happen. To schedule a time, you might use the language of suggestion, like, how about 5 o'clock? But you might also continue using that word would, as in, Thursday would be best, or 1 p.m. would work for us. Let's try some examples of suggesting times. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
How about Thursday afternoon, just after lunch?
"3 p.m. would be ideal on our end."
Sometime on Monday or Tuesday would work for us.
We could do either Wednesday morning or Friday afternoon.
One thing you might notice is suggesting options, as in sometime on Monday or Tuesday, and either Wednesday morning or Friday afternoon. Giving options is a great way to speed up arrangements, whether you're arranging a delivery or trying to find a time to meet with someone. So, besides time, you also need to arrange a place. Once again, you might use would and could to make a request. That is, you might say, could we get that sent? Or, we'd like that shipped to a certain place. The place itself might be a location, like our Chicago office. It might be a street address, like 545 Oak Street. Or it might be a specific part of your building, like the front door. How about some practice with arranging a delivery place? Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Could we get that sent to our head office in Dallas?
Please have the driver come to our back door.
This is for delivery to 388 Fortune Drive.
We'd like this shipped to our warehouse in Seattle.
Did you hear that expression, have the driver come to our back door? You can see how useful it is to say, have something done. When you make arrangements, you're having something done, but you might also instruct someone to have the driver do something. All right, we've practiced different ways of making arrangements, but how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Allison and Paul. Allison is talking to Paul to make arrangements for a delivery.
Could we schedule a delivery for next week?
Sure thing. When were you thinking?
Sometime Monday afternoon would work.
Okay, we have a truck going out on Monday at 1.
Not too difficult, right? Allison starts by asking if they could schedule a delivery. And when Paul asks about time, Allison tells him what would work. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the first speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by requesting a delivery for next week. Then you'll arrange a time by saying Monday afternoon would work. Ready? Here we go.
Sure thing. When were you thinking? Okay, we have a truck going out on Monday at 1.
Okay, that's all for this lesson. We've learned how to suggest arrangements as well as how to schedule a time and place. We'll be back soon with more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to express doubt in English. Have you ever been in a meeting when someone says something and you think, I'm not really sure about that? You might be unsure about whether it's true or whether it's a good idea. We call that feeling doubt. And it's important that you are able to express doubt confidently and politely. Now, if you're a little bit unsure of something, you can use the expression I just used and say something like, I'm not really sure, or I'm not 100% sure. Or you could say very directly, well, I have a few doubts. Another way to express doubt is with a question, like, are you certain that would work? Just by asking the question, you are telling people you have doubts. Let's try a bit of practice with some of these ways of expressing mild doubt. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
I'm not 100% sure about that.
Well, I have a few doubts.
That seems a bit unlikely to me.
Are you certain that would work?
You might notice that these expressions sound more polite than just saying, I doubt that. The reason for this is softening words like a few or a bit, and hesitation words like and well. But sometimes you may be less concerned about being polite. Instead, you might want to show strong doubt. And to do that, we can be more direct. For example, you could say, "There's no way that would work." That certainly sounds clear and direct, doesn't it? You could also say, "That's simply not feasible," which means it won't work. Or, "I really don't think that's a possibility." These are all ways to show you have strong doubts about what's being talked about. Let's try some examples of showing strong doubts. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
There's no way that would work.
I'm sorry, but that's simply not feasible.
I seriously doubt it.
I really don't think that's a possibility at all.
These are strong and direct expressions, but you did hear one common way to make them a bit more polite. The expression, "I'm sorry, but." You can use this to introduce a strong or honest opinion, such as, "I'm sorry, but that's really not possible." Now, what if you don't have strong doubts and you're simply unsure which of two competing ideas or positions you support? Well, in this case, you might want to take a neutral position. If you're neutral, it means you haven't decided yet, or you don't want to commit to one side. In this case, you might say, "I could go either way," or "I can see both sides of this issue." Another way to express this idea is with the idiom, "I'm on the fence about it." That simply means you're not on one side or the other, but right in the middle. How about some practice with these expressions? Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
I could go either way on this.
I'm kind of on the fence about it.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, I can see two sides to this issue.
Did you hear that expression, "We'll just have to wait and see"? That's simply a way of saying you're not ready to make a decision yet because you need more information or the future is uncertain. All right, we've practiced different ways of expressing doubt. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Nick and Kendra. Nick is suggesting ways of reducing costs, and Kendra is expressing doubt.
One way to reduce costs is to get a smaller office.
I'm not 100% sure about that.
Well, we could cut staff instead.
I'm sorry, but that's simply not feasible.
Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying, you're not 100% sure about the idea. Then say you think Nick's second idea simply isn't feasible. Ready? Here we go.
One way to reduce costs is to get a smaller office. Well, we could cut staff instead.
Okay, that's all for this lesson. We've learned how to express mild and strong doubt, as well as how to take a neutral position. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to express support for an idea in English. In business, it's very important to be able to express your ideas confidently. That doesn't just mean coming up with new ideas. It can also mean expressing what you think about other people's ideas. In our last lesson, we learned how to express doubt. Today, we're going to look at the other side and talk about how to express support for an idea. Now, sometimes you want to show moderate support or just a bit of support. In this situation, you can use expressions like I guess or I suppose before stating your support. And when you state your support, you might use expressions like I can see your point or that's a good way to look at it. Let's try a bit of practice with these ways of expressing moderate support for an idea. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
I could go along with that.
Yeah, I guess I can see your point.
That's worth considering.
I suppose that's a good way to look at it.
Did you hear that expression, I could go along with that? If you go along with something, you agree or support a plan or way of doing something. And notice that saying, I can or I could are mild expressions. It's very different from saying, I will go along with that. Sometimes, however, you don't want to show moderate support. Instead, you want to show strong support. Well, you might add definitely after I can or I could to turn that expression into one showing strong support. You might also use words or phrases to emphasize, like, I'm behind you 100%. In that case, behind you means I support you. Or you might say, that's a really great idea. You can see how different that sounds than, I guess that's a good idea, which doesn't sound strong at all. Let's try some examples of showing strong support. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
I'm behind you 100%.
I can definitely back you up on that.
I must say, that's a really great idea.
No doubt about it.
So in our last lesson, we looked at expressing doubt. But if you say, no doubt about it, you're actually saying you strongly support something. One other expression you heard for emphasis is, I must say. You can introduce any opinion with that expression, just to emphasize how strongly you feel. All right, we've practiced different ways of expressing support. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Jillian and Dave. Jillian is expressing her opinion about who should join a work team. Dave is expressing support for her ideas.
I think we should bring Jane onto the team.
I could go along with that.
And maybe Gregory too. He's really smart.
No doubt about it.
Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying, you could go along with that. Then show strong support for the next idea by saying, no doubt about it.
I think we should bring Jane onto the team. And maybe Gregory too. He's really smart.
Okay, that's all for this lesson. We've learned how to express mild or moderate support for an idea and how to say you strongly support something. We'll be back soon with some more 9 to 5 English lessons, this time with a focus on phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs can be tricky, especially if you're just beginning to learn English. But we'll have you speaking like a pro in no time. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today's lesson will be our first to focus on English phrasal verbs. And we're going to kick off with some phrasal verbs for talking about beginnings. If you're not sure what a phrasal verb is, well, I just used one. I said we're going to kick off. Kick off is a phrasal verb because it has a verb, kick, and a preposition, off, and when used together, the meaning is different from the individual words. There are hundreds of these little two-word combinations in English. We use them all the time, and their meaning isn't always clear from the two words they're made of, so it's a great idea to study them. In our example, to kick off means to start or begin. And just like the verb start, we can either say that an event kicks off or that we kick off an event. Let's try a bit of practice with this phrasal verb. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself.
The event kicks off this morning at 8 a.m.
We're going to kick our conference off with a great speaker.
In that first example, kick and off stayed together. But in the second example, those two words were split, as in kick our conference off. Some phrasal verbs can be split like this. Some can't. And some, like kick off, can be used both ways. So when you learn a new phrasal verb, it can be a good idea to make note of whether it can be split like this. There's another common phrasal verb that has basically the same meaning as to kick off, and that's to start off. But with start off, we usually give some more explanation of what's happening. We might say, let's start the meeting off with some introductions. And while kick-off is often used with events or things with an official start, the phrasal verb to start off is used to describe the beginning of a journey or a process. Let's try some examples with to start off. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
I'd like to start this meeting off by reviewing the agenda.
We will start off on our trip to Chicago tomorrow.
Now, I don't want you to think you can just change the preposition and keep the same meaning or sense. One tricky thing about phrasal verbs is that you can have one verb with many different prepositions, and each combination has a different meaning. For example, we just looked at to start off, but we might also use the phrasal verb to start up. However, they're not used in exactly the same way. If you start something up, you're not beginning a meeting or a journey or a process. Instead, you're starting a business or a machine. If you start up a business, you are creating a new one. And if you start up a machine, you are turning it on. How about some practice with this phrasal verb? Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Susan left our company last year to start up her own business.
When I arrive at the office each day, I start up my laptop.
So, you can start up a new business. But do you think you can start up a new hobby or some activity that you do in your free time? Does it sound right to say something like, I recently started up swimming on weekends? In fact, no, we can't say that. For hobbies, we use a different phrasal verb, to take up. So you can say, I recently took up swimming on weekends. But here's another tricky thing about phrasal verbs. Sometimes the same phrasal verb can have different meanings. To take up doesn't just mean to start a new hobby. We also use it to talk about how much space or time something uses. Like, responding to email takes up so much time. Let's practice to take up with a couple of examples, one for each of these meanings. Repeat the examples after you hear them.
Last year, I took up gardening in my free time.
This table takes up too much space in our office.
Great work! We've practiced several phrasal verbs to talk about beginnings. But how do these sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short conversation between Tom and Bonnie. They're talking about a speech that Bonnie is preparing for.
So, how are you going to start your speech?
I think I'm going to kick off with a story.
A story? I guess that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I want to start off with something interesting.
Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying you're going to kick off with a story. Then explain that you want to start off with something interesting. Ready? Here we go.
So, how are you going to start your speech? A story? I guess that's not a bad idea.
Okay, that's all for this lesson. Our first with a focus on phrasal verbs. We've learned how to use several phrasal verbs related to beginnings, including to kick off, to start off, to start up, and to take up. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to look at phrasal verbs for changing the topic. Remember, a phrasal verb is just a combination of a verb and a preposition with a special meaning. Last time we looked at some phrasal verbs related to beginnings. Today, I want to turn to phrasal verbs for changing the topic of conversation. Did you hear me just say we will turn to a new set of phrasal verbs? Well, turn to is one common phrasal verb that we use to change the topic of conversation. We're not turning our actual body or head in this case. We're turning our attention to a new topic. Let's try a bit of practice with this phrasal verb. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself.
Okay, next I think we should turn to the sales report.
So, turning to projects, any updates from the development team?
As you can hear, when we use turn to change the topic, it is always followed by a description of the new topic. But what if you want to change the topic, but you don't want to specify which topic? Well, in that case, you can say you want to move on. That just means you want to go to the next thing. It could be an activity or a topic. So you could just say you want to move on with nothing else after it. Or you could say move on to plus the next activity or topic. Let's try some examples with to move on. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Before we move on to look at finances, are there any more questions?
It doesn't look like we're going to agree on this, so let's move on.
we've been looking at ways to move on to a new topic. But what if you're in a conversation or meeting and you want to talk about something that you've already discussed? Or the conversation moves away from the topic you want to talk about? In this case, we can use circle back to or get back to a particular topic. That just means that you want to talk about something you were previously discussing. That's useful when you're in a meeting and people start talking about something that isn't on the agenda. How about some practice with using get back to or circle back to? Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Maybe at the end of the meeting, we can circle back to this issue.
I'm sorry, but can we get back to the budget here?
Now, remember, many phrasal verbs have more than one meaning. That's true about one that we just practiced, to get back. We used it to mean to return to a topic. But that's not the only meaning. Get back is also what you do when someone returns something they borrowed from you. If you borrow my pen, later I'll want to get it back from you. Yet another meaning for get back is to move back. So when someone says get back, they want you to move away from them. Let's practice using to get back with a couple of examples. Repeat the examples after you hear them.
I loaned my car to Dave and need to get it back.
The security guard told the crowd to get back.
Okay, so we've practiced several phrasal verbs for changing the topic. But how do these sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short conversation between Kimmy and Adam. They are in a meeting discussing several topics.
So, I think we're done talking about the budget.
Yes, let's move on to the staffing situation.
Okay. And is there anything else we need to discuss?
Maybe at the end of the meeting we can get back to the schedule?
Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by saying you want to move on to the staffing situation. Then you will suggest getting back to the schedule at the end of the meeting. Ready? Here we go.
So, I think we're done talking about the budget. Okay. And is there anything else we need to discuss?
Okay, that's all for this lesson, our second with a focus on phrasal verbs. We've learned how to use several phrasal verbs related to switching topics, including to turn to get back to, or to circle back to, and to move on. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to look at phrasal verbs for investigating. In case you forgot, a phrasal verb is an expression with a verb and a preposition. You hear them used all the time by English speakers. In fact, I just used one. To look at, meaning to examine something. And in this lesson, we'll be looking at other phrasal verbs related to investigating or examining an idea or situation. Later, you can check out some of our other lessons on phrasal verbs. Whoa, I just did it again. I said you can check out some other lessons. Now, I bet you've heard this phrasal verb, check out, before. It's a very common one for talking about examining or investigating something. If you check something, you're looking at it to see if it's correct. But if you check out something, it means you're just looking at it out of interest. Maybe you want to check out a new part of town or check out what a colleague's working on. Let's try some practice with this phrasal verb, to check out. Listen to each example, then repeat it yourself. Ready?
Let's go to the trade show and check out some new machines.
Hey, check out this new website I found.
One thing to note here is that the object comes after check out, unless you use the word it or this. Then we say check it out, not check out it. Now, sometimes you want to explore something not just out of interest, but more carefully to see if it's good for your purposes. Like if you want to buy a new computer, you might scope out some new machines online. You could say check out in this situation, but scope out tells us more clearly that you're looking carefully at something. How about some practice using to scope out? Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
We met with Alan to scope out whether he'd be a good partner for us.
We scoped out the new office space before we bought the furniture.
As you can see, to scope out is useful when you're looking at something to make a decision, like if you're choosing a business partner or a new office location. But there's another expression we can use to talk about collecting information or facts, and that expression is to look into. It's quite similar to some meanings of to look at, but is more specifically used to talk about gathering information or doing research. Let's try some more examples with to look into. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
Charlie, could you look into flights to Chicago for next week?
I'm going to the factory to look into the problems that have been reported.
From these examples, you can see that look into can be used for basic information gathering activities. But sometimes you want to talk about looking very deeply into something. Maybe that's some kind of secret which requires more effort. Or maybe it's something that's not so simple to understand. In these situations, we can also use the phrasal verb to dig into. You probably know that to dig is to make a hole in the ground, and you can use dig into to talk about making a serious effort to uncover information. Let's practice to dig into with a couple of examples. Repeat the examples after you hear them.
All right, everyone. Let's dig into this sales report together.
Anne, I'd like you to dig into the website issues this afternoon.
Okay, so we've practiced several phrasal verbs for talking about investigating or examining. But how do these expressions sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Jack and Dora. Dora has asked Jack to speak with her about something.
Hi, Wendy. You wanted to talk with me?
Yes. Did you check out the latest report?
I did. And it looks like there were some problems.
Indeed. And I'd like you to look into those for me.
Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to start by asking whether Jack checked out the latest report. Then tell him you want to look into the problems. Ready? Here we go.
Hi, Wendy. You wanted to talk with me? I did. And it looks like there were some problems.
Okay, that's all for this lesson about phrasal verbs. We've looked at several expressions about investigating, including to check out, to scope out, to look into, and to dig into. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning.